the European Union has a serious problem. Italy, my dear friends, we've already told you about it. The Italian economy has more problems than a car without wheels, right? That's something we all know. But now, take a look at this chart. Italy's budget is out of control. Between January and July of 2024, Italy's public deficit nearly matched what the country registered in the first 7 months of 2020. Of course, there's a difference we cannot overlook. 4 years ago, the world was facing the issue that we already know. Today, Italy has the worst debt-to-deficit ratio of all European countries. Look at the chart on your screen, which has many experts on edge. Italy not only has a lot of debt, but its budget gap is relentless. If we had to describe the situation of Italy's public finances, we could perfectly say that the mismanagement is almost absolute. The question is, how did Italy's economy get to this point? And since we're here at Finance for All, here's another question. What are the consequences of this situation? Well, we'll tell you right now. Let's get started. Hello to all the community of Finance for All, welcome to another video. We're in 2020, the pandemic is hitting Western economies hard, including Italy, which, as many of you surely remember, was one of the most affected countries. At this point in 2020, governments around the world are juggling to try to mitigate the economic impact. Stimulus plans are popping up everywhere. And in the midst of such a context, the Italian government under Giuseppe Conte has a bright idea, to push for home renovation reform in Italy. Now, we're not talking about a small subsidy. The Italian government decided to cover most of the cost of home renovations, no more, no less. The idea was to do so through large tax deductions for homeowners who decided to renovate their properties, with the goal of improving energy efficiency and, while at it, making them more beautiful and modern. We're talking about tax credits that could be sold and that could cover, get this, up to 110% of the renovation cost. Yes, you heard me right. Some taxpayers could actually make money simply by renovating their properties. The government would pay for everything with a tax credit and even give them a bonus. Why? We don't know for sure, but what we do know is that this wasn't even all of it. At the same time, under this same plan, subsidies were approved for the government to cover up to 90% of the cost of fixing certain facades. The plan became known as the Super Bonus and was a sort of extreme renovation program, a way to bring Italy's real estate market into the 21st century. A plan that, when it launched, was extremely popular. And of course, how could it not be? It was like those American TV shows where they give away home renovations, but for everyone. In fact, since the tax credits could be sold, what ended up happening was that people paid the contractors with those same credits. In other words, you didn't even have to spend €1 to fix your house. All you had to do was call a contractor and tell them to get to work. The question is, how on earth did they come up with such a plan? Well, according to the original justification, Italians were supposedly going to win several medals with one race. Think about it, they'd reactivate the economy, create jobs quickly, especially in the construction sector, which is very labor-intensive, and at the same time, reduce energy costs for families and advance the fight against climate change. At the time, the plan seemed like the perfect solution. The government would spend a few tens of billions, and the country would get back on track. The problem? Suddenly, Italians rushed to renovate their homes. Understandably, if the government was paying for it all, why not? As a result, what was initially going to cost a few tens of billions quickly ballooned to over 220 billion of euros, almost 10% of the entire national GDP. That was the final bill when the current Minister of Economy sounded the alarm and called this plan a national disaster. Of course, the current Minister of Economy wasn't the first to raise concerns. Back in 2022, Prime Minister Mario Draghi tried to convince Parliament to put an end to this plan once and for all, but he didn't succeed. This has turned out to be a completely disastrous policy for the country. The first reason is the long-term impact that the super bonus will have on Italy's debt and economy as a whole. But another aspect is that the main beneficiaries have been the wealthier population. And it's not just about the cost anymore. To make matters worse, the Italian government has had to finance this astronomical endeavor with debt, at a time when we're no longer in an era of zero interest rates. For example, the Italian government is currently paying about 3.6% on public debt. This means that the housing plan costs almost 8 billion of euros each year just in interest payments. That said, the plan has caused a more than 30% surge in the revenue of the construction sector, unlike what has happened in the rest of Europe, where these years haven't exactly been great for the industry. On the other hand, this plan has also fueled massive inflation in the construction sector and primarily benefited higher-income individuals, as they are the ones who can take full advantage of the tax credits. Today, the consensus in Italy is that this plan has been a complete disaster. Among other things, the credit rating agency Fitch has made it clear that this renovation plan will push Italy's public debt above 140% of GDP by 2027, and it could get even worse. Just look at what happened last year. While the forecast was for Italy to close 2023 with a deficit of 4.5%, it ended up being more than 7%. Now, the government of Giorgia Meloni has managed to hit the brakes and freeze this plan, but the burden is already on the table. Of course, we're at Finance for All, and the question is, what impact has all this had on the Italian stock market? Well, pay close attention, because I think this is going to surprise you. Italy seemed to have everything in place for disaster: an aging population, a huge budget gap, and a lot of political instability, everything that markets typically dislike. Yet, in recent years, the Italian stock market has performed much better than other markets in Europe. Since the end of 2022, this market has gained more than 50% in value. The question is, why? Well, we can identify several reasons, such as the greater weight of the financial sector, just as interest rates are rising, or the recovery of the automotive industry. However, the main factor in this case is probably a very specific one: the low valuation of the Italian stock market. Confidence in Italy was so low that at one point, Italian companies were trading at rock-bottom prices. This means that, despite how bad the reality was, the expectations were even worse. And this is often one of the biggest sources of profitability in the markets. Now, the Italian economy is growing faster than those of France and Germany for the first time in decades. But, no matter what, it's clear that Italy still has problems. 40 years ago, this was the country of fashion, music, theater, and the most exclusive cars. Today, its economic situation is completely different. The Italian government now has three major goals to try to return to being the Italy that once dazzled the world. First, to improve productivity, which, as you can see, has been plummeting since the beginning of the century. An anomaly among the major economies of Europe, Italy's second objective is to once again attract foreign investment and turn around this downward trend. Third, of course, is the aim to finally get its public finances in order. To achieve these three goals, the Italian government has launched a massive process of reforms. The government is even considering reintroducing nuclear energy into the country, 35 years after its last nuclear plant was shut down. Now, we don't know whether Meloni's government will succeed in this crusade. The biggest challenge, as we've mentioned, is Italy's high level of debt and its poor public finances. If this hasn't caused more problems so far, it's largely due to the intervention of the European Central Bank, which has become the largest holder of Italian debt. But there's another reality we can't ignore: Italy remains a very wealthy country. As you can see, the wealth of Italian households far exceeds the government's debt. This means that Italians still have a lot of room to maneuver. This is the part that markets often overlook, leading to overly pessimistic expectations, even in troubled scenarios. And this is actually quite common in the markets. It's normal for bad data to overshadow everything, even the good news. As I mentioned earlier, this has been the case in Italy, and it can be a huge source of profitability. As the saying goes, we shouldn't let the tree block our view of the forest. But for now, having come this far, we ask that if you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.